This week, thousands of pro-Palestinian activists staged a sit-in at Melbourne University. Take a look at the crowds that reportedly included university staff who gathered to prevent authorities from entering the building. Joining us is the co-CEO of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Rivchin. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. This is just the latest in a series of protests that have unfolded right here in Australia and in other parts of the world. It appears as though these protests are escalating. Can I get your response?
Well, this is, as you said, just the latest scene from around the world and in our campuses around the country as well. And it shows that things are getting progressively worse unless strong action is taken by universities. Having a situation where Jewish academics and staff can't actually go to their own campuses, can't lecture, can't teach, can't learn because of this band of extremists that are now taking over buildings, public spaces at our most prestigious higher education institutions, this shouldn't be allowed to happen. And there is a right to peaceful protest. There's a right to disseminate information, no matter how objectionable or extreme that information may be. But there is no right to occupy public spaces, to keep Jewish students and academics off campuses, to threaten, to intimidate, to harass, to publicly support war and terrorist organizations listed and prescribed in this country. That is utterly unacceptable. And if universities can't deal with this effectively, the police need to.
Another university, ANU, has ordered pro-Palestine activists to dismantle their campus camp by the end of the week. Several activists have been told that by failing to clear their tents by Friday would result in disciplinary measures for violating the ANU Student Code of Conduct. Alex, is this the right approach?
It is, and codes of conduct exist so that they can be enforced, so that students and academics that transgress, that make the universities inhospitable, inaccessible to others, that action is taken against them to ensure that order is restored and unis are used for their rightful purpose, which is to learn, to study and to engage. There is no reason why anyone should be camping on university grounds. And the fact that this has been allowed to happen for several weeks now is a shame, but it's good that the universities are now waking up to this and taking strong action to enforce their codes and clear these encampments out. They have really become hubs, centers for extremism on our campuses. We've seen the footage from places like ANU and University of Queensland, where students have openly professed support for Hamas atrocities and have pledged unconditional support for Hamas. These things should not be happening in our civilized society and certainly not on our university campuses.
Do you take issue with some of the leaders who have remained quiet? For example, Chancellor of ANU, Julie Bishop, hasn't really spoken out about the issue.
Well, we've been saying for a long time that the dire situation we find ourselves in this country since October 7, with fraying social cohesion, with rising extremism, with weekly street protests calling for the destruction of the Jewish state, with boycotts of Jewish businesses, all of these things that are happening, the incitement against our community from certain clerics, these things require bold and clear and principled leadership. And it's got to begin with the federal government. And of course, with what's happening now at the campus level, we need VCs to speak out. Some of them have. Some of them have been very clear and very moral in their position in protecting the rights of Jewish students and academics, in condemning anti-Semitism unequivocally, but others have been sluggish and it's just not good enough.
Let's talk about the anti-Israel protests that have erupted in America, in American college campuses. There are reportedly outside agitators taking part in these protests, and there are reports that some protesters are receiving funding from several Democrat donors, according to a Politico analysis. What's your understanding of who may be financially backing these protesters and what impact is it having?
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that there's a strong presence of outside agitators, that there is funding coming from various sources, because ultimately what these protests are about and what these individuals who support them want, it's not merely about a hatred of Israel. It's about a hatred for Western values. It's about a hatred for liberalism, a hatred for the US and Australia and everything that these countries stand for. And so no doubt those in a position of power and with means will see this as an opportunity to infiltrate these movements, to make them more aggressive, more violent, more extreme in order to pursue their ideology and their agenda. So we need to wake up to what's happening. This isn't a matter of students being concerned with human rights abuses or international law or the peace process, or even a concern for the Palestinians. This is about being anti-Western, wanting to paralyze our system, our higher education facilities, our government, our way of life, and we need to stop this.
Would you say that these protests are fueling anti-Semitism?
They certainly are. When you have people chanting in support of an intifada, which means the suicide bombing of Israeli civilians, when you have people chanting, and now a federal senator from the Labour Party repeating the slogan "from the river to the sea," which is an old Arab nationalist slogan calling for the destruction and ethnic cleansing of the state of Israel. When you have these sorts of things happening, it inflames tension, and you see it transmit to social media, where the tone and the tenor of discourse and commentary has become so nakedly and openly and unashamedly anti-Semitic. I'm seeing things online which I've never seen before, with the sort of regularity and the viciousness of the attacks on the Jewish community, the repetition of old anti-Semitic tropes and slogans. And this is all linked to a lack of leadership and what's happening in the public domain. It then flows into every aspect of our society. And if we don't stop it at the top, things will get worse and worse. And we're already seeing alleged terror plots against our community in Australia and around the world. And I fear what will happen if we don't step back from this chasm.
The United Nations has quietly revised down its estimated death toll for Gaza. Initially, it was estimated that the casualty number for women was 9,500 and 14,500 for children. However, those figures have been significantly reduced to under 5,000 for women and 8,000 for children, respectively. So those figures are around half of the numbers in the UN's previous report. Can I get your reaction to this development? What does it tell us?
Well, look, from the beginning of the war, many media outlets have been uncritically quoting Hamas statistics for casualties, statistics which are obviously inflated for their own political purposes, statistics which draw no distinction between militants, terrorists, and civilians. And a lot of the world, UN agencies and various non-government organizations in the media have been blindly repeating this because it suits their own agenda. I don't expect people to take notice of this, because ultimately those who have an agenda of fostering greater hatred of Israel and the Jewish community will ignore this. They will keep focusing on slurs and accusations which hold no basis in fact, like the outrageous claim of a genocide. You have a situation where Israel is fighting a horrific war inflicted on it by Hamas on October 7. It is a just and necessary war to defeat terror, to rescue its hostages, and prevent further attacks on Israeli territory. When you compare it, for example, with other wars in recent years, in the Syrian civil war, you had 600,000 people dead, 600,000. I never heard the word genocide mentioned once, or the sorts of actions we're seeing in international forums and online as well. In the Yemen civil war, 150,000 people died. Likewise, the same accusations leveled at Israel were never made. But after 7 months of a horrific war that was not of Israel's choosing, we now learn, as we really knew all along, that the civilian death toll is less and at a lower proportion than any other modern war of its type. But again, given the propaganda use of these numbers, I don't expect people to actually take note and to now question or apologize for the slurs and accusations which they unfairly leveled for so long.
That is what is quite concerning, when these figures have been reported and then they're flooding social media feeds. You know, the revised figures may not reach everyone. Let's look at what's been happening in Sydney. US hip-hop artist Macklemore has performed a new pro-Palestine protest song at his sold-out show in Sydney. And the song, which calls for an end for the war in Gaza, supports student protests on US campuses, and it was met with cheers and Palestinian flags from the audience. Let's take a listen.
It has been beautiful to see around the world solidarity with the Palestinian people. People that have spoken up, that have used their voice, that have stood up against genocide, that are advocating for liberation and freedom for all human beings all over the world.
Alex, can I get your reaction to the video?
Well, this is the sort of hypocrisy that we're seeing everywhere at the moment, where he positions himself as being a peace activist and a human rights activist and a pro-Palestinian activist. But if he were any of those things, he would be calling first and foremost for the end of Hamas. Hamas unleashed a war against Israel, committing some of the most barbaric acts we've seen in modern times. the war that has ensued is just and necessary and reasonably expected from what occurred on October 7. And the Palestinians are suffering for it, no doubt. Many civilians are suffering as a result of this war. So if Macklemore actually cared about those people, he would be calling for the downfall and the end and justice for Hamas atrocities, but he's not. And instead, he casually levels the same slurs about genocide, which divides our society further, inflames tension, drives anti-Semitism because it accuses the Jewish people and the Jewish state of committing these horrific crimes of which they're innocent. But this is what's happening right now. And it's shameful to see people who have a platform, who have a voice, who could use that for positive purposes, to bring people together, to speak truth, are doing exactly the opposite.
Macklemore also joined campus activists at the University of Sydney, and this video has emerged and it shows Macklemore encouraging others to get involved.
What up, it's Macklemore. Just want to shout out all the students at Sydney University, encampment, come down, support Free Palestine.
Alex, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, this is a guy who a few years ago was photographed dressed up in a caricature of a Hasidic Orthodox Jew. So this is someone with a record of having disdain and utter disrespect for the Jewish people. And it's not surprising that he latches on to a cause such as this, which has now become such a vessel for propagating more lies and more hatred and more disinformation about the Jews.
Co-CEO of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Rivchin, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour. Great to speak with you.
Thank you so much.